Right, guys, welcome back to another round of predictions. We're going to be focusing in this video on the next round of Premier League matches. There's some fascinating fixtures as always. I'm joined again by Jack from the Betting Island team. Jack, good to see you.
Good to see you again, Lewis. Looking forward to another exciting weekend of Premier League action.
Yeah, it should be outstanding. There's always some good games. I don't know where you want to start. I thought one of the more interesting ones, or intriguing ones at least, is the early Saturday noon fixture, Brentford Manchester United. Really tough one to call. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I'm leaning. It's a very tricky one now. Both teams sort of low on confidence. You don't know what to expect from either of them, really.
Yeah.
But Brentford at home they're much stronger at home than they are away from home, and I just think United seem to show up more against the bigger side. So maybe an early Saturday game that might struggle here again. So I'm thinking just leaning towards Brentford, if I'm being honest, and the odds for Brentford are decent. So I'm just thinking Brentford might nick a win here in this one. They have a good record the last few years against Man United as well. So I think at home they're a hard team to beat.
I tend to agree. I was leaning more towards sort of, if you are going to go for an outright, either a Brentford win or maybe a draw. Because these games, although Brentford have got a good record, you're right, I think it's probably going to be a tight game. I neither side full of confidence. The one thing that's interesting is that both teams can see goals. I think they've had one clean sheet between them in 10 matches. So I can see both teams scoring. So if you want a slightly lower risk bet, maybe betting on both teams to find a net or over 2.5 goals. You can get in the last one at around 1.66. So there's some value there. The big problem for Manchester United is it's an astonishing stat. They haven't won back-to-back league games under Ruben Amorim. And I think this is a really tough game because both teams have had a week's rest. They had that advantage over Chelsea last week. They haven't got home advantage now, and I think it's Brentford always really physical and difficult to play against. So I think I can't see United win, but it might be one of those games where you target those sort of match betting markets, the over/under and the both teams to score. But an interesting game nonetheless.
Yeah, I agree with you 100% there. It is going to be an interesting one, and as you say, maybe match odds not the way to go, but definitely a game that could see a lot of goals in it. I think just because of the nature, as you said, their poor defensive displays, maybe not so much their attacking displays. It's how sort of poor both sides are at the back. That could see that one. Another interesting game, probably that could go either way and tight, is on the Sunday. Newcastle host Arsenal. This is all the makings of the game of the weekend, I think, just on paper. So what do you think of that one?
I think this is a really tough game to call, as you say. I think Newcastle have had the edge recently, though. I think they've won 3 of the last 4. There's clear patterns in the game. They're always really tight. Defences seem to be on top. It's interesting to note that there's only been 6 goals in those 4 games, and both teams haven't found the net in all of them. So there's always been one shot out. So I think we can predict a similarly tight game. I think it will be very, very close. I think there'll be less than 2.5 goals. Defence is on top. That's priced at 1.74, which is quite competitive given how difficult both teams are to play against. So yeah, I can see that being a good market. As for the result, I'm not sure. I think Newcastle may have an edge at home, but I think the draw is probably the best value here. If you want a higher risk wager, that's around 3.40.
Yeah, I'd agree. I actually have the same thing written down here. A draw. I wouldn't usually tip a draw because it's such a hard thing to predict, but I just, no matter how much I look at this game, I just can't see either team winning. I think both sides are just very well matched, especially to say defensively. Arsenal are unbelievable at the back, and Newcastle are brilliant at the back as well. 2 big teams, so maybe neither would have an advantage when it comes to set pieces. We could cancel each other out. So I'm just thinking a draw all over it, as you say, and maybe a both to score, but as you said, both sides are good defensively. It's under 2.5 maybe is where I'd lean towards in this one, but if I was to go for better odds, I'd be going for the draw.
Yeah, I agree. I think the one thing to point out is Arsenal have come under criticism because their attitude in sort of bigger games, they tend to be a bit more defensive. They've done it against Manchester United, they did it at Liverpool, and they did it at City last week, even at home. So I think that could cost them at Newcastle, where a set piece or one moment could cost them. But should be an interesting game, if not a high scoring one.
Yeah, it's sort of interesting in a different way than the Brentford one. The Brentford one, we're kind of thinking there might be goals. This one's more interesting maybe for just looking at it from a tactical point of view. And another interesting game, 3 o'clock Saturday, Crystal Palace, Liverpool. Crystal Palace unbeaten for a long period of time now. A lot of draws in there, but they're still unbeaten. Liverpool the only team with a 100% record. This is fascinating, this one. I chopped and changed here. It's hard to know what to predict with this one. Palace at home are very strong as well.
It's a really tough game, deceptively tough. You're right about the unbeaten run. I checked it, 17 games, which is huge, and people forget they've won 2 trophies in that time as well.
Yeah.
So it's funny because all the talk about Man United is with that system and whether it can work or not, and yet Glasgow at Palace uses the same system and it works.
Yeah.
It's probably because they're a bit more pragmatic and counter-attack more, but they've got a lovely balance in the team. And I think this could be a really difficult game for Liverpool because Liverpool haven't clicked yet either. It's weird to say because they've won all 5 games, but they haven't played well for 90 minutes in any game. They've had periods where they've struggled. So I think this could be a game where, again, it could be quite low scoring. It could be the odd goal that nicks it. I think if you were going to predict a sort of bigger game that was going to end in a sort of a surprising result this weekend, this may be the one.
Yeah.
Palace always good value for a draw, as you say. They draw a lot of matches, especially at home, and good defensively. They could even maybe nick a win because, just as we say, Liverpool haven't been at their best. And if they don't quite click again, Palace are the sort of team that could punish them.
Yeah, I agree. It's going to be a really tough one for Liverpool. I think, especially now, is attacking-wise, Ekitike getting sort of stupidly suspended last night. So Isak will start from the front. If he's ready to start from the front, it's hard to know because he only played the first half there last night. But I think it's going to be only 1 goal in it. I'm leaning towards maybe a 2-1 Liverpool win just because they are Liverpool and they seem to always find a way to win. It could be another late winner. It's hard to say. But I wouldn't be surprised if Crystal Palace showed up and beat them because they're a brilliant side themselves. Even after losing Eze and Elise the last couple of seasons, they still tend to show up. And as you say, Glasner is a brilliant manager and they're very hard to beat. But I'd just be leaning towards maybe, for the odds thing, Liverpool winning both to score at about 3.5, 3.6. So that's just what I was looking at, just to try and increase odds. But both to score would be a much safer way to go here because I think Liverpool will concede just because that seems to be what they're doing at the moment. They seem to take the lead, concede, and then need a winner at the end. So maybe this is the day they get going, but it's a hard one to see them turning Palace over easily here. I think it's going to be a tight one again.
Yeah, I agree, and I agree on the markets as well. If you did want to go under 2.5 goals, surprisingly priced high at 2.10, given that Palace's games don't usually see a lot of goals, but I think that's more based on Liverpool and their attacking firepower. If you do back Palace, you can get on around 3.75 at a loony bet. So that is obviously a higher risk wager, but higher reward, so it just depends on how you see it going.
Yeah, now one that's probably a bit more obvious, Manchester City at home to Burnley. Can you see Burnley getting anything out of this game?
No, I feel for them because I think they've actually been quite competitive in the games they've played. They've not looked too bad defensively. They're brilliant defensively last season in the Championship, and they've actually had more goal threat than I thought they'd have. But I just feel like they're just losing games, and they've only won 1 of 5. And City, although they've been a bit more pragmatic in some of the bigger games this season and dropped off and defended against Arsenal last week, I think you saw them at Wolves on the opening day of the season. They're more than capable of clicking and scoring goals, and I think the big factor is Erling Haaland. I mean, when he's in the type of form he's in, it's hard to. He's capable of scoring enough goals by himself to win the game. So I think it's a City win. I think this is the type of game where you might put a little handicap in, maybe minus 1.5 goals. Lifts their price to 1.52 at Direction Bet, which isn't bad when you're backing City at home. So that would be a take. Also, another interesting market is the goal scorer market with Haaland. He doesn't always offer a lot of value as an anytime scorer, but you can get on him to score the first goal here at 3.05, and he does open the scoring for City in a lot of games, so that might be another interesting market if you want to create a bit more value.
Yeah, again, I agree with you on both of them. I was looking at all the markets, and the odds are just not great for anything, and the handicap market is looking at the -2. Similarly, it's 2.25 with Boyle Sports. City are going to be dominant in this game. They haven't been at their best, but in a game like this, you do expect them to win comfortably. They will click, as you say. Haaland, first goal scorer, I think that's nearly not nailed on, but he does tend to, especially in these sort of home games when maybe Burnley are sitting in the beginning, Haaland gets in the goal and that sort of sets them on their way for him to maybe score 2 or 3 because just he's a freak of nature, really. People are saying he hasn't had the best start to the season, but he's scored 5 goals for Norway. He scored 6 or 7 for Man City in 4 or 5 league games, so he just always seems to find the back of the net. So I'd agree with you on both of those markets for sure. It's not really a match where you go with a City win, it's way too low. Over 2 goals is a bit too low as well. So you kind of need to think outside the box for this match if you are going to bet on it.
I totally agree. I think it's one of those games as well where an early goal makes it a lot more interesting. I think if City do score early, I think then you could be looking at a bigger win. But the only reason that I'm looking at Handicap should go for around 1.52 is just because they haven't been at their best. And I think against United as well, in the derby a couple of weeks ago when they went 2 or 3, they shut up shop. And I think against Burnley it could be similar. So I think, I think those are the markets that offer the best value. A small handicap, don't go too crazy because they haven't been consistent and they haven't been at their best this season. So,
and finally, another game that looks to be a tight one on paper. Chelsea hosting Brighton. They sort of have a unique history these last few years. Chelsea seem to take a lot of Brighton's players and even managers, and this one, and very, very fascinated to see what this one is, because Brighton do have a good sort of record against big teams. Even away from home they have a good record, so this one's a fascinating one to look at.
yeah, I agree. I think they've beaten Chelsea in the last 2 games, and they've had, even before then, they've had some really impressive results against them home and away. Brighton this season look typically Brighton, create a lot of chances, have a lot of the ball, look really entertaining to watch, but just don't score enough goals. Tottenham last week, it was slightly different because they were actually dominated for periods of that game, which is unusual. But I think it's one of those games where it's hard to go to these big teams and win. I think Brighton are capable of getting a draw and a result, and a definite result there, but the question really is, whether they can score enough goals to actually beat Chelsea. I think it'll be a lowish scoring game. These games in the past between these 2 teams have produced goals, but I feel with Brighton not finding the net and struggling in front of goal, and Chelsea potentially being without Cole Palmer, who's their most creative force, I can see it being one of those games where it's a little bit tighter. You can get under 2.5 goals scored at 2.25, which is quite good value. The interesting thing is, of course, both teams played in the EFL Cup in midweek, but have rested their first 11, so both teams should be fresh. But yeah, I don't see a particularly high scoring game, and I think it'd be a really tight result. I think if you were going to pick a winner, you'd probably pick Chelsea.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think Chelsea win with Boyle Sports anyway is 1.75, which I think is decent enough odds. But I could see Brighton nicking a goal, so maybe both to score would be a safe one as well. It's just, as you say, this one is really, you could make a case for a draw, you could make a case for Chelsea win. Under 2 goals, over 2 goals, it's sort of one where you think go with your gut. Where I think Chelsea will nick it. I think, as you said, it'll be a tight one. I'll go all in it here or there. I don't see it being a rout by any means, so I just be going safe for this one, going with the Chelsea win.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think the only reason I would edge slightly under on the goals front is just, like I say, Brighton have scored 16-5 in the league. They're scoring for fun in the EFL Cup, but not so much in the league. I don't know if they should switch their players over. But in the league they're struggling, and Chelsea, like without Palmer, they're a different team. And obviously with Delap injured as well, gives them less options. I just feel like it could be one of those games where we've seen a lot of goals in the past, so you think there's going to be a lot of goals, which is why the market's as priced as they are. But I just feel this will be tighter. Chelsea didn't look great at Old Trafford. I know they had a man sent off early, but even when it was 10v10, they just didn't look like creating anything. So I think getting Palmer fit might be one of those where you wait and see the team and see if he's fit to start, because he makes such a difference to that team.
Yeah, so that concludes our weekend's fixtures. Is there any sort of, out of the 6 picks we've had, that's standing out for you that you would definitely recommend for someone to bet on this weekend?
I think it depends what you're looking for. If you were going for sort of outside bets, I think look at the Newcastle Palace games. They're games where you might see higher value sort of outcomes, like a draw or maybe a win for Newcastle Palace. I think those games are tight enough to warrant that pick if you want to take slightly higher risk wagers. But I think generally speaking, I think if you're looking for a safer bet, backing both teams to score in the Brentford Man United game is a good way to go. Or in the sort of middling offer is Haaland to score either any time or first in City Burnley. That seems to always offer good value. And what about you?
Yeah, I'm thinking if you're maybe an outside sort of one or strong odds, and just leaning towards Brentford getting that win in the early game, from 3.3. So that if I was to do an outside one, I'd go with that, and then maybe safer one, either a Chelsea win or both to score in Palace Liverpool, because I think Liverpool will concede. But it's a fascinating weekend fixtures, and we've only sort of scratched the surface looking at sort of the bigger teams there. There's some other fascinating games. So that then concludes this week's picks for our Premier League predictions on Bet in Ireland. Please check out the website as usual, betinireland.ie, and tune in next time. Thanks very much, Lewis.
Thanks very much, Jack. Take care.